The night was heavy with mist, and the jungle was alive with strange voices carried on the wind, and in the distance, lightning flashed through the clouds, lighting up the twisted trees and long vines that hung like black ropes, and the ground was wet and soft under the weight of countless leaves that had fallen from the canopy above, and among the shadows, something moved slowly and without sound. The predator was huge, with a body covered in thick hide marked with scars from battles long past, and its eyes glowed like two embers in the darkness, and its breath was low and steady as it moved between the trees searching for prey. And it had no fear here, for in this place it was the fear, and every creature knew its scent and kept away from its path. Then from far ahead came a sound that did not belong in this jungle, and it was thin and small, and filled with something that pulled at the ear in a strange way, and the predator paused, lowering its head to listen, and again the sound came soft at first, then breaking into a sharp cry, and it was the cry of something young and helpless, and it was not a voice the jungle had heard before. The predator began to move toward the sound, weaving between trees, stepping over roots that rose like the backs of great snakes, and pushing aside hanging vines that dripped with water, and with each step the cry grew clearer, and the rain began to fall in soft drops through the leaves above, until the whole jungle smelled of wet earth and green life, and still the predator walked. At last it came to a small clearing where the light of the moon touched the ground, and there in the center was a small figure crouched low in the mud, and the figure was shaking, and the sound that had called the predator here was spilling from its tiny mouth, and the predator stood still watching and smelling the air, and the scent was strange, yet it spoke of life and blood and warmth. It was a human child no taller than the predator's chest, and it was wrapped in torn cloth, and its hair was wet and clung to its face, and its skin was pale under the moonlight, and its eyes were wide and full of fear and confusion, and the predator tilted its head, as if trying to understand what it saw, and its claws flexed against the earth ready to strike or protect. The jungle around them had gone silent, as if holding its breath, and even the wind seemed to wait for what would happen next, and the predator took one slow step forward, and the child froze, watching with eyes that shone with both terror and hope. And the predator lowered its head, bringing its eyes level with the small face before it, and the scent of the child was sharp with fear, but there was also something else beneath it, something warm and alive that the predator did not wish to destroy. The rain grew heavier, falling in a silver curtain around the clearing, and drops slid down the predator's hide and ran from the child's hair to the ground, and the predator made a sound low and deep like distant thunder, and the child flinched, but did not run, and the predator moved closer, its great shadow falling over the small form, shielding it from the cold rain, without thought. In the darkness beyond the clearing, faint lights began to move, weaving between the trees like fireflies, but they were not fireflies, and the predator knew this scent too. It was metal and oil, and the sharp taste of energy weapons, and the lights grew brighter, cutting thin beams through the mist, and the sound of boots crushing wet leaves came with them, steady and careful, and filled with intent. The predator lifted its head and stared into the shadows where the lights were coming from, and its muscles tightened, and its breath slowed, and the child turned too, as if sensing danger from a place it could not see, and the lights drew closer, until voices could be heard in a language sharp and clipped, and filled with command, and the words carried the cold tone of hunters closing in on their prey. The predator stepped fully between the lights and the child, its body now a wall of muscle and hide and claws, and its eyes glowed brighter in the mist as it waited, and the rain hissed against the leaves above, and the air seemed to hum with the promise of violence, and the child reached out a small hand, resting it lightly against the predator's leg, as if, without knowing, it was choosing to trust the very thing that could have ended its life in a single breath. From the shadows the lights burst fully into the clearing, and figures in dark armor appeared, their faces hidden behind metal masks, and each carried a weapon that hummed with deadly energy, and their boots sank into the mud as they spread out in a line blocking the path out of the clearing, and the one in the center raised a hand and pointed straight at the predator and the child without a word. The jungle waited. The rain fell, and in the space between heartbeats the night held still as predator and hunters stared at one another, and the fate of the small human cub balanced on the edge of what would happen next. The rain fell harder, turning the clearing into a pool of silver light, where water rippled with every drop, and the armored soldiers stood at the edge, their weapons steady in their hands, and their eyes hidden behind black glass that reflected the pale glow of their searchlights, and the predator did not move, only stood over the child like a wall, and its chest rose and fell with slow power, while its eyes stayed fixed on the captain, who stood in the center of the line. The captain raised a hand, and the soldiers halted, their boots sinking deeper into the soft ground, and his voice came low over the calm for his men to hear, and he spoke with the calm of someone who had faced death too many times to count, saying that the command was simple: find the cub and kill anything that stands in the way, and the words were cold like steel and carried no doubt or hesitation. One of the soldiers shifted his weight uneasily, glancing at the predator and whispering that it was madness to fight such a thing, for no one had survived meeting it, and the captain reminded him that orders were not to be questioned, and that fear was a weakness that killed faster than any beast, and the calm went quiet again, except for the steady sound of rain and the faint static that seemed to crawl through the earpieces. The predator lowered its head slightly, the glow in its eyes sharp like twin suns caught in the mist, and it made a low growl that vibrated through the ground and sent a shiver up the spine of every soldier present, and yet the child behind it clung tighter to its leg, burying its face in the rough hide, as if that sound was a promise of safety rather than a threat. The captain's grip on his rifle tightened, and he took one step forward, his boots making a sucking sound in the mud, and he stopped only a few paces from the predator, keeping his weapon pointed low but ready, and his visor tilted slightly, as if studying the way the creature positioned itself, the way its muscles tensed and relaxed, as though measuring the space between them. From deep within the jungle came another sound, faint but rising like a whisper, turning into a rumble, and the predator's ears flicked toward it for a moment, but its gaze never left the soldiers, and the captain caught that small reaction, and his mind noted it, though he did not speak, and the rain drummed against their armor louder now, until the sound was almost enough to drown the soft whimper that came from the child. A soldier to the left raised his weapon, slowly lining up the sights on the predator's head, and his finger began to squeeze the trigger, but before he could fire, the predator's growl turned into a sharp bark of sound that cracked through the clearing like thunder, and every soldier flinched. Even the captain's breath caught for a moment as the sheer force of it rolled through the mist. The jungle seemed to press closer around them, the trees leaning inward, the vines swaying as though some unseen wind moved through them, and the soldiers felt the hairs on their neck rise, as if the darkness itself was alive and watching. And then out of that darkness came movement, quick and low and almost silent, but not silent enough. Figures broke from the shadow between the tree, shapes that were smaller than the predator, but faster, and their bodies gleamed wood in the rain as they bounded forward on four limbs, with mouths that split wide to reveal rows of teeth like shards of glass, and their eyes burned with hungry light, and the soldiers recognized them instantly. Razor beasts, the carrion hunters of this world that followed the scent of blood and death. The captain shouted for his squad to hold position and fire at will, and energy bolts burst from the rifles, lighting the clearing in flashes of white and blue, and the razor beasts twisted in the air, avoiding some shots, but others fell hissing into the mud, their bodies smoking from the heat of the weapons, and the smell of scorched flesh mixed with the rain, and steam rose in ghostly shapes around them. The predator moved without hesitation, leaping forward with a power that shook the ground, and one massive claw swept through the air, catching a razor beast mid-leap, and tearing it aside with such force that it broke a tree as it struck, and the child stumbled in the mud, but the predator's tail curled back to steady it, never letting it fall too far from safety. Two more razor beasts rushed from opposite sides, their jaws snapping, and the predator spun low, catching one by the throat in its jaws and crushing it with a sound like snapping stone, before hurling the body into the second, which tumbled into the mud with a snarl and tried to rise, only to be crushed under the predator's weight as claws tore deep, leaving nothing alive beneath. The soldiers fired in tight bursts, trying to avoid hitting the great beast, though some shots came dangerously close, and the captain noticed that it never turned its fury toward them, only toward the razor beasts, and it fought with a precision that seemed impossible for a creature thought to be mindless and wild. When the last razor beast fell, the clearing was quiet except for the hiss of the rain and the sharp breathing of the soldiers, and the predator stood over the child again, lowering its head to check that it was unhurt, and the child touched the side of its jaw with a small hand, trembling, but still brave enough to reach out, and the predator leaned into that touch for the briefest moment before turning its gaze back to the soldiers. The captain lowered his weapon slowly, feeling the weight of what he had just seen, and he wondered if this was truly the mindless killer from the stories, or something far older and far more dangerous in ways they had not understood, and his men shifted uneasily behind him, waiting for the next command. The predator took a step toward the captain, and the ground seemed to shake under its weight, and the soldiers lifted their rifles again, unsure if this was the start of an attack or something else entirely. And the captain stood his ground, meeting the glow of those alien eyes, without flinching, though his heart beat hard in his chest. The rain slowed for a moment, and the mist thickened until the air felt heavy in their lungs, and somewhere beyond the clearing, deeper in the jungle, another sound began to rise, low and strange, like a horn made from the bones of some ancient giant, and the captain knew that whatever it was moving toward them, and that the night was far from over. The predator stopped only a few steps from the captain, its head high, and its stance wide, as if declaring itself between the child and any danger that might come, and the captain realized that this was not a standoff between enemy and foe, but between two protectors, each guarding what they valued most, and in that moment something passed between them, unspoken but understood. Before the captain could speak, before any man could move, the strange horn-like call echoed again, closer now and heavier, as if it was pulling the shadows themselves toward the clearing, and the predator turned its head slightly, listening, and the child gripped its leg tighter, sensing that something far worse than the razor beasts was about to arrive, and in the stillness of that breathless moment the universe seemed to hold itself, waiting for the next choice to be made. The jungle air was thick and heavy, and the sound that had rolled across the trees still lingered like the echo of something vast moving just beyond sight, and the soldiers stood tense, their rifles up, but their eyes drawn to the predator that remained planted firmly between them and the small human cub, its body a wall of muscle, hide, and shadow that dared anything to approach. Then from the left side of the clearing came a sudden rustle, like the tearing of dry leaves, and the crack of a branch under weight, and the captain swung his rifle toward it, signaling his squad to tighten their line, and the predator's ears turned sharply in the same direction, its head lowering, and its eyes narrowing into slits of burning gold, and in the next moment the trees exploded outward, and a shape shot from the darkness, so fast it was only a blur of wet scales and snapping jaws. It was a razor beast larger than the ones from before, its hide streaked with pale scars, and its teeth long and curved like sickles, and it landed in the mud, with a heavy splash, its claws digging deep as it lunged straight for the captain. But before it could reach him, the predator moved like lightning, intercepting it with a shoulder charge that sent the beast rolling into the base of a tree with a howl of rage and pain. More shapes burst into the clearing from every side, razor beasts by the dozen, their eyes glowing like shards of glass in the rain, their bodies slick with water and blood from the carcasses they had fed on before arriving, and the soldiers opened fire, their rifles spitting lines of white energy that lit the mist in violent flashes, and the beasts darted and twisted through the bolts, closing the distance with terrifying speed. The captain barked orders for the squad to hold formation and keep the line tight, but it was already breaking as beasts crashed into them. One soldier went down under the weight of two attackers, their jaws snapping inches from his face, until another soldier shot them off him, sending steam and blood into the air, and the screams of the dying were swallowed quickly by the roar of rain and gunfire. The predator fought without hesitation, its claws slicing through thick hides, its jaws crushing necks in a single snap, and its tail whipping with enough force to send smaller beasts flying across the clearing, and every move kept the child shielded, the predator never stepping far from where the cub crouched in the mud, its small hands over its ears, and its eyes wide with shock. The captain found himself firing into the flank of a beast that had tried to circle behind the predator, and he realized in that moment that he was not just keeping his men alive, he was helping the creature keep the child safe. And it was a strange feeling, one that made him question the purpose of the mission whispered into his calm hours ago in the safety of the drop ship. A razor beast leapt from behind, aiming for the child, and the predator spun so fast the air seemed to crack around it, catching the beast by the skull in one claw and slamming it into the ground hard enough that the earth shook, and before the body had stilled, the predator ripped another off its back with a twist that left blood spraying across the rain. The soldiers began to push forward again, their fire more controlled now their shots finding targets as they adjusted to the speed and movement of the attackers, and slowly the clearing became a graveyard of steaming corpses, and the smell of death mixed with the clean scent of rain and the metallic tang of spent energy rounds. But then a deeper growl rolled through the clearing, a sound that silenced both predator and soldier alike, and from between two massive tree trunks a creature stepped forward. Unlike the others, its body was wider, its jaws longer, and its back lined with jagged spines that pulsed faintly with some inner light, and it moved with slow, heavy steps, its gaze locked on the child, as if nothing else existed in the world. The predator shifted its weight, its claws digging into the mud, and its head lowering as it let out a rumbling snarl, and the spined beast answered with a roar that made the leaves tremble, and the soldiers glanced at one another, knowing this was the alpha of the pack, and that killing it would end the assault, but none dared move first. The two giants circled each other in the rain, their eyes locked and their muscles coiled for the strike, and then the spined beast lunged jaws wide, and the predator met it head on. The sound of their collision like a tree splitting in a storm, and the ground beneath them churned to black mud as they tore at each other, the predator's claws raking across the spines, and the alpha's jaws snapping at its throat. The captain shouted for his squad to clear a path, and they fired at the flanks of the alpha, forcing it to turn its head away from the predator long enough for the beast to drive its claws deep into the side of its neck and twist, sending it crashing to the ground with a roar of pain. But even wounded, the alpha tried to rise, its eyes still fixed on the small human cub. The predator did not let it rise. Instead, it slammed its weight down, crushing the breath from the alpha's chest, and with a final violent wrench of its jaws it ended the fight, and the body went still, steam rising from the deep wounds and the rain washing blood into the mud. Silence fell heavy except for the sound of water dripping from leaves, and the soldiers lowered their rifles, breathing hard and staring at the predator that now stood over the lifeless alpha, its chest heaving, its body streaked with cuts and fresh blood, but its eyes still sharp and alive, and it turned back toward the child, who reached out with trembling hands and touched its arm without fear. The captain stepped forward through the bodies, his boots sinking into the red mud, and he met the predator's gaze across the short distance between them, and in that moment he knew that this was no mindless monster. This was a guardian, and its protection was absolute and unshakable, and if anyone tried to take the child from it, they would die where they stood. Somewhere in the deeper jungle another sound began to grow faint, but steady, like drums being beaten far underground, and the captain realized with a chill that this was not the end of the night, but only another beginning, and the predator seemed to hear it too, its head turning slowly toward the darkness between the trees, while the child clung to its leg tighter than before. The soldiers looked to their captain for orders, but for the first time in his long service, he did not speak immediately, for he knew that whatever was coming might force him to choose between the mission he had been given and the strange new understanding forming between man and beast in this rain-soaked corner of an alien world, and in that thought he felt the weight of the universe pressing down, as if waiting to see which path he would take next. The rain fell in a steady curtain across the clearing, and the steam from the bodies of the fallen beasts rose in twisting trails that vanished into the cold mist, and the predator stood motionless over the small human cub, while the soldiers formed a loose arc around them, their weapons raised, but their eyes full of uncertainty, and in the middle of it all the captain stood with his rifle gripped tight, his boots rooted in the soft earth, and his mind racing with the weight of what he had just seen. The predator's chest rose and fell in slow measured breaths, its muscles tense yet still as stone, and its eyes locked on the captain's visor, as though searching for the meaning behind the man's presence, and the child clung to its leg, with both hands, the small face half hidden, but the eyes watching every movement with quiet fear and hope, and the sound of the rain seemed to grow louder until it drowned out the soft rustle of the trees at the edge of the clearing. The captain knew that one wrong step could shatter the fragile balance that hung in the air like the edge of a blade, for this was no longer a hunt, it was a test between two forces, neither willing to back down, yet neither willing to strike first, and he felt the weight of unseen eyes, as if the jungle itself was waiting for the decision that would shape what came next. The predator lowered its head slightly, not in submission, but in warning, the deep rumble of its growl vibrating through the ground and into the boots of every soldier present, and the captain could feel it in his chest like the echo of distant thunder, and he did not look away, for to do so would be to admit weakness, and weakness in the face of such a creature was an invitation to be swept aside. The child's voice rose suddenly, cutting through the heavy air, like a clear note on still water, and the small words came simple and sure, saying, "Do not hurt him," and every soldier froze at the sound of that tiny plea, and even the captain felt something stir inside him, though he kept his stance firm and his hand steady on the rifle, and the predator's growl softened almost imperceptibly, as if the words had reached it as well. The rain thickened, turning to a fine mist that clung to armor and skin, and made the air feel colder, and somewhere beyond the clearing a faint mechanical hum began to rise, just at the edge of hearing, and the predator's ears twitched toward it, while the captain's calm came alive with a crackle, and a voice from command filled his ears sharp and without warmth, saying, "Eliminate both targets before the drones arrive, and secure the area for retrieval," and the words carried the weight of absolute order. The captain's jaw tightened behind his visor, and his finger found the curve of the trigger, but he did not squeeze, for his mind was a storm of thought and memory and calculation, and he understood that killing the creature now might end one danger, but it would also destroy whatever strange bond had formed between it and the child, and perhaps between it and himself, and the rain seemed to press closer, as if the world demanded an answer. The predator did not move, its eyes steady on the captain's face, and in that unblinking gaze the man thought he saw something more than animal instinct, something like judgment or expectation, and the child still clung to its leg, watching the captain with eyes that begged without words, and the air between them all felt alive with the tension of choices that could not be undone. The hum in the distance grew louder, and the soldiers began to shift uneasily, for they too knew the sound of the drones that scoured battlefields with unfeeling precision and no regard for friend or foe, and the predator's gaze flicked briefly toward the sound before returning to the captain, as if to say, "Decide now before the sky itself takes the choice away." One soldier to the captain's right whispered that they should fire before the drones arrived to avoid being caught in crossfire, but another muttered that maybe they should let the drones handle it, and the captain silenced them both with a raised hand, his visor still locked on the predator, and the moment stretched thin, like the final string on a bow ready to snap. The rain hissed against the leaves above and ran down the plates of the soldiers' armor in silver lines, and the jungle seemed to lean inward, the shadows pressing close around the clearing, as though whatever lived beyond the trees was listening and waiting, and the captain felt a strange awareness that this meeting between human soldier and alien guardian was being recorded somewhere, not by machines, but by the memory of the world itself. He stepped forward one pace, his rifle lowering slightly though still ready, and the predator matched his step with a shift of its stance, the claws of one hand flexing into the mud, and its tail moving slowly behind it like a serpent tasting the air, and the child looked up at the captain, the eyes wide and bright in the gray light, and the voice small but sure, saying, "Please," and that word struck deeper than any order. The hum became a roar as the drones drew near, their lights cutting through the mist in thin white beams that danced along the treetops, and the soldiers turned their heads slightly to watch the approach, but none dared take their eyes fully from the predator, and the captain could see the first dark shapes moving in the clouds above, circling like vultures waiting for the kill. The predator's growl rose again, deeper and sharper, now its muscles tightening as it shifted to place itself more squarely between the child and the incoming light, and the captain understood that the creature would not yield no matter how many enemies came against it, and in that understanding came the realization that they were standing on the edge of something far greater than a mission or a battle. The voice in the captain's calm repeated the order with colder force this time, warning that failure to comply would bring consequences that reached far beyond this jungle, but the word seemed distant and hollow against the pounding of the rain and the heavy breath of the predator, and the quiet heartbeat of the child standing between them and the command. The first drone broke through the canopy above, its sleek body gleaming with wet metal, and its weapon systems spinning up with a soft electric whine, and the predator's eyes flared brighter in the shifting light, and the captain knew that in the next breath everything would break into motion, and nothing would be the same again. The captain inhaled the cold, wet air and held the predator's gaze, and the choice crystallized in that single instant with all the weight of his life behind it, and he knew that whatever he chose would not only decide the fate of the child and the beast, but might also ripple outward into the fabric of a galaxy that did not yet know what had happened here in the rain and the mist and the silence before the storm. The roar of the drone above grew sharper, and the mist swirled in the air as its bright beams swept across the clearing, touching the predator's scarred hide and glinting against the wet armor of the soldiers, and the captain stood with his rifle raised halfway between duty and something he could not name, while the predator loomed over the human cub, like a shadow made flesh, its eyes locked on the steel bird in the sky. The order from command still echoed in the captain's mind to eliminate both targets and secure the site before the drones took over, and the words had the cold taste of authority that had shaped his entire life. Yet now they felt brittle against the weight of the scene before him, and the way the small hands of the child gripped the predator's leg with such absolute trust, and the way the creature did not flinch from the threat above, but instead braced as if ready to take the strike itself. His finger rested against the trigger, and his men waited for his signal, some tense and ready to fire, and others glancing at the tree line, as if hoping for another path that would spare them from what was coming, and the rain dripped from visors and shoulders, pooling in the mud, where the bodies of the razor beasts still lay cooling in the mist, and all around the clearing the jungle seemed to lean closer, silent and watchful. The predator's growl was low now, a deep vibration that the captain could feel through his boots, and it was not the growl of rage, but of warning, and he understood that in the language of beasts this was a message that it would not strike first, but it would end any threat that came near the cub, and in that unspoken truth the captain saw a mirror of himself on the battlefields, where he had stood between the helpless and the endless tide of war. The drone's beam fixed on the predator, and the hum of its weapon core began to rise like the winding of a blade before the swing, and the captain exhaled slowly, his breath turning to mist in the cold air, and in that moment he lowered his rifle, a gesture small, yet louder than any word he could have spoken, and his men looked at one another unsure, but they too eased their weapons, just enough to signal the choice that had been made. The predator's eyes narrowed slightly as if studying him, and the growl faded into a steady breath, its stance shifting as though to prepare for a fight, not against the soldiers, but against the machines now circling above, and the child looked between them and whispered something soft and strange in a language the captain did not know yet the meaning carried in the tone, and the predator's ears turned toward the sound, and its muscles tensed with new resolve. The drone adjusted its position, and the captain's calm erupted with sharp commands demanding explanation and compliance, but he muted it without answering, and he raised his hand to his squad, giving the silent signal to spread and cover the flanks, not to aim at the predator, but at the sky, where the dark shapes of more drones were beginning to descend through the canopy, their weapons glowing faintly through the mist. The first drone fired a warning burst into the mud, sending a spray of water and soil into the air, and the predator stepped forward, placing itself fully between the child and the incoming threat, and the captain felt the decision settle deep in his chest like a stone, and he shouted to his squad to open fire on the drones, their rifles cracking through the rain as energy bolts streaked upward, cutting through the mist and striking the sleek metal forms above. The predator leapt with impossible speed, its claws catching the nearest drone in mid-descent and tearing into its core with a shower of sparks, and the machine spun out of control, crashing into the trees and exploding in a burst of light and smoke that lit the clearing for an instant, and the child ducked low, covering its head, while the predator landed in the mud, its back already turning toward the next threat. The sky above was alive now with movement, as more drones dropped into view, their targeting beams dancing across the clearing, searching for the fastest route to their targets, and the soldiers moved in a tight rhythm, firing bursts that punched through armor plates and sent metal bodies tumbling into the canopy below, and the predator's roar split the air as it launched itself at another drone, ripping one of its wing struts away and sending it spinning into the ground. The captain's visor flashed with proximity alerts as the drones began to flank from the sides using the cover of the trees, and he shifted position, calling his squad to adapt their formation and keep the predators of steel from boxing them in, and through it all the creature stayed close to the child, never moving more than a few paces away, no matter how far it leapt to strike. One drone made it through the crossfire, swooping low toward the child, and the captain saw the predator twist midair to intercept, slamming into the drone with its full weight, and the impact cracked the ground beneath them and tore the machine apart in a burst of shrapnel that hissed in the rain, and the predator rose slowly, shaking the metal from its claws and growling at the others still in the air. The fight raged for what felt like hours, though only moments passed, and then the last drone fell from the sky, in a burning arc, crashing into the undergrowth, with a sound like a tree falling in a storm, and the jungle was quiet again except for the rain and the heavy breathing of soldiers and beast alike, and the clearing was littered with wreckage and smoke curling into the gray sky. The captain stood still for a long breath, his rifle lowering fully now, and his eyes meeting the predators across the clearing, and in that gaze was a recognition that whatever they were to each other, now they had stood as allies in this fight, and that bond once forged could not be easily broken, and the child stepped out from behind the predator and looked up at the captain with eyes that seemed far older than their small face should hold. Somewhere far away the faint sound of engines drifted through the mist, and the captain knew command would send more than drones next time, and he also knew that when they came he and his squad would have to decide again whether to follow the voice in their ears or the truth they had seen here in the rain and the mud and the fire of battle, and as he turned his gaze back to the predator, he felt that the choice had already been made, and that the universe itself would feel the weight of it in the days to come. The smell of smoke and wet metal hung heavy in the clearing, and the broken shapes of the drones lay scattered like the bones of some strange creatures, while the predator stood with its chest rising and falling in slow, deep breaths, and the child at its side held tight to its leg, as if nothing in the world could break that hold, and the captain watched them with a weight in his chest that he could not shake, for he knew this fight had only been the first wave. Above the canopy the clouds rolled in darker and heavier their edges, glowing with flashes of light that were not lightning, and the air began to vibrate with a low hum that grew deeper with each passing second, and the predator's ears turned toward the sound as it lifted its head and narrowed its glowing eyes, and the soldiers shifted uneasily, checking the charge in their rifles and scanning the sky, though the mist made it hard to see more than a few shapes moving above. The hum broke into a sharper whine as new craft descended through the clouds, larger than the drones and shaped like black knives, with wings that bent at unnatural angles, and their undersides glowed faint red as they slowed their fall, and the heat from their engines pressed against the skin even through the cold rain, and the captain knew these were not scouts or hunters, but war machines made for the front lines. The predator stepped forward one pace, placing itself more firmly between the child and the open sky, and the captain felt his jaw tighten behind the visor as he realized what these machines would bring, and the calm in his ear came alive again with the same cold voice from before, demanding that he retreat and leave the targets for capture and termination, and the words were lined with the kind of final authority that crushed all doubt. But this time the captain did not answer. The first of the war craft opened fire, not with precision bolts like the drones, but with wide bursts of energy that tore chunks from the ground and split tree trunks to splinters, and the soldiers scattered, taking cover behind fallen logs and the wreckage of the drones, and returning fire in bursts that flared against the craft's shields and left glowing scars along their armor, but did not yet bring them down. The predator moved in a blur, leaping high into the air and catching the edge of one craft's wing with its claws, and the metal screamed under the force as it ripped a panel free, exposing the glowing machinery within, and with one powerful strike it tore the core loose, sending the craft spinning into the jungle, where it exploded in a ball of fire that lit the mist in fierce orange light, and the heat rolled across the clearing, making the rain hiss on the soldiers' armor. Another craft banked low over the trees and opened fire on the predator, but the captain's squad cut across its line of sight, laying down a wave of energy fire that forced it to veer away, and as it did the predator lunged from the side, tearing into its wing and dragging it down into the mud, where its engine screamed and died, and the wreckage smoldered under the falling rain. The air was filled with the sound of battle, now the roar of engines, the crack of rifles, the hiss of burning metal, and the deep snarls of the predator as it tore through the machines one after another, and each time it struck it moved back toward the child, never letting the distance grow wide enough for any danger to slip between them, and the captain found himself fighting with the same pattern, keeping the squad close to the predator's flank so that no enemy could break their shared line. Then a shadow passed over the clearing, larger than the rest, and the soldiers looked up to see a craft unlike the others, its body wider and its sides lined with massive weapons that glowed with deep crimson light, and the captain knew this was the command ship for the strike group, and that if it fired its full arsenal nothing in the clearing would survive, and the predator seemed to know it too, for it froze for one heartbeat, then threw its head back and gave a roar, so loud the ground shook. Underfoot, from somewhere deep in the jungle, another roar answered, different in tone, but equal in power, and the captain realized with a shock that there was something else out there, something the predator had called, and in the moments that followed, the trees beyond the clearing began to move, as if pushed by a wind that came from the earth itself, and then a second shape emerged from the shadows, larger even than the predator, and armored in thick plates of natural bone and hide. The new beast charged into the clearing with a speed that made the ground quake, and without hesitation leapt onto the command craft, its massive claws digging into the metal and tearing away great sheets of armor, and the predator joined it, leaping up alongside, and together they ripped through the ship's weapon arrays before it could fire its main barrage, and the machine fell sideways into the trees, where it split in two under the combined weight of the creatures, and the burning wreck lit the mist with a dull red glow. The soldiers held their fire, now watching in disbelief as the two great beasts stood over the ruins of the command craft, their breaths heavy, and their eyes scanning the sky for any more threats, and the captain lowered his rifle, fully knowing the fight was done, at least for now, and the child stepped forward, still holding the predator's leg, and looking up at the second beast, without fear, as if sensing that it too was an ally. The rain began to ease, and the mist thickened until the wreckage and the trees seemed half swallowed by it, and the captain felt the weight of silence settle over the clearing, the kind of silence that follows moments where the balance of power has shifted in ways no one can yet measure, and he knew that whatever these creatures were, they were not simply defending the child, they were defending something greater, something that had drawn even the most powerful machines of war into defeat. In the distance, the faint whine of retreating engines drifted away, and the predator turned its gaze back to the captain, holding it for a long moment before lowering its head in what might have been acknowledgement, and then it looked down at the child, and the small hands tightened on its leg, and together they began to move toward the edge of the clearing, where the jungle waited with shadows deep and paths unseen. The captain watched them go, his squad silent around him, and he felt the truth sink into his mind that the war he thought he understood was only a fragment of something much larger, and that the sky burning above them tonight had been the first sign of storms yet to come, and he knew with certainty that the next time they met it would not be under orders from any command, but under the weight of choices only he could make, and choices that would decide far more than the fate of one cub and one guardian in the heart of this alien world. The rain had faded to a thin mist that clung to the trees and drifted over the broken clearing where the earth was torn and blackened from fire, and the smell of smoke still hung heavy, though the sounds of battle had vanished into the distance, and the soldiers stood in silence, their weapons lowered, their armor streaked with mud and blood, as they watched the predator walk toward the shadowed path of the jungle, with the human cub at its side, each step slow and unhurried, as if the creature knew no one here would dare stand in its way. The captain felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him, like the humid air after a storm, for he knew something was about to happen, something that would not fit into the lines of his orders, or the neat reports that command would demand, and the predator seemed to feel it too, for it stopped at the edge of the clearing, its glowing eyes scanning the mist ahead, and the child turned, as if sensing eyes watching from deeper in the trees. From the wall of green a shape began to emerge, larger than any soldier and taller than the predator itself, a figure armored not in steel but in plates of dark stone that shimmered faintly as if alive, and it walked with the slow, unshakable steps of one who feared nothing, and the soldiers instinctively tightened their grip on their weapons, though none dared raise them, for the presence of this figure pressed into the bones and made the air feel heavier with each step it took. When it came fully into the clearing, the soldiers saw that its face was hidden behind a mask carved from some alien bone, marked with deep lines that glowed faintly in the mist, and its hands were empty of weapons, yet it carried the weight of command in every movement, and behind it came guards clad in lighter armor, their eyes fixed on the predator and the child, though they too made no move to close the distance. The predator stood still, its head high, and its body a wall between the newcomer and the child, and the air was thick with the tension of two forces measuring each other, and the captain realized that this was no ordinary enemy or ally. This was the ruler of this world, or at least of this part of it, and that nothing happened here without their will, and the soldiers seemed to feel it as well, for none moved or spoke. The tall figure stopped a short distance from the predator, and there was a long pause, in which only the rain dripping from the leaves could be heard, and then the figure slowly bent one knee, lowering itself until it was kneeling on the wet ground, its head bowed, and its hands resting on its thighs, and the guards behind it did the same in perfect silence, their eyes never leaving the predator. The captain felt a shiver run down his spine, for he understood the meaning of what he saw, and it was something older and deeper than any order he had ever been given. For this was not fear, and it was not surrender. This was recognition and respect, and the predator seemed to understand as well, for it gave a slow rumble that rolled through the air like distant thunder, and then it stepped forward one pace, though it kept the child close at its side. The kneeling figure lifted its head enough for the voice to carry through the mist, and though the captain did not know the words, the tone was heavy with reverence, and the guards repeated the sound softly, as if part of a ritual, and the predator inclined its head in return, and for a long breath there was no sound except the slow, steady rhythm of rain against leaves. The child looked up at the masked figure, then back at the predator, and seemed to understand something unspoken, for they stepped forward, just enough that the small hand rested against the predator's side, and the tall figure's gaze followed that movement before lowering again, as if the sight confirmed a truth long known, yet never seen, and the captain could feel that every soldier around him was holding their breath, as though any sound might break the fragile balance of the scene. After a time the tall figure rose again with the same unhurried motion, and took one step back, signaling the guards to do the same, and the voice spoke again, this time clearer and slower, and the captain caught the shape of one word repeated twice, and he felt without knowing why that it meant protector or guardian, and the predator gave another low sound in answer before turning slightly toward the jungle. The captain knew the moment was ending, and that once the predator left the clearing the world would close over this event as if it had never happened. Yet he also knew that none who stood here would forget it, for in that single kneel the ruler of this land had shown that the bond between a beast and a human cub was something that could command even the highest to bow, and the meaning of that would spread in ways none could predict. The predator began to walk again, the child holding to its leg, and the tall figure, and the guard stepped aside, clearing the way without a word, and the captain watched as the pair disappeared into the green shadows, the mist curling around them until they were gone, and only the sound of the jungle remained, and the soldiers shifted uncertainly, glancing at the captain for direction. He looked around at the wreckage of machines and the bodies of the razor beasts, and then at the silent figures of the local ruler and their guards, and he understood that whatever conflict had brought them here was no longer the same war they had come to fight, for the balance had shifted, and the predator had left with the child under a protection that even the most powerful in this world honored, and that truth would ripple far beyond this place. The captain gave the order to stand down, and the soldiers lowered their weapons, fully the hum of their rifles fading into silence, and the mist seemed to thicken once more, as if closing around the memory of what had happened, and he knew that when command asked for a report they would expect a list of kills and captures and tactical outcomes. Yet what he had witnessed here could not be reduced to those numbers, and perhaps it was better that way. The tall figure turned its masked face toward the captain, and for a moment they stared at one another across the clearing, and in that gaze was no threat, only the recognition of someone who had also chosen not to stand in the way of the guardian and the cub, and the captain gave the smallest of nods, which the figure returned before turning away and melting back into the mist, with their guards following. The jungle swallowed the last shapes, and the clearing was left in silence, broken only by the gentle sound of water dripping from the high leaves, and the captain stood still for a long moment before turning to his men and leading them away from the place where the universe had bent its knee not to power or fear, but to the bond between a human child and the monster who had chosen to protect them. And somewhere deep inside, he felt that this was not an ending but the quiet beginning of a story that would outlast them all.